Padre Pio once saw what truly happens when a soul confesses its sins with absolute sincerity. It did not happen in a vision of thunder or fire, but in a narrow church, where the air smelled of wax and old wood. What he witnessed that night was so quiet that no one else even noticed it, yet it carried the weight of eternity. And he would never again hear a simple, "Forgive me, Father," in the same way. The day had been long. Confessions had started early, continued through the afternoon, and showed no sign of stopping by evening. The friars moved quietly through the corridors of San Giovanni Rotondo. Candles burned low. The winter light outside had already faded. Padre Pio sat in the confessional, his shoulders slightly bent, hands resting against the grille. He was used to the rhythm, the opening of the door, the shifting body, the familiar words. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." He had heard that sentence thousands of times. Yet each time, something in him remained completely alert, not to judge, to listen. He heard not only sins, he heard fear, he heard excuses, he heard habits. And sometimes, very rarely, he heard something else. Something that did not fit into words. Something that felt like a soul stepping forward without a mask. That was what he would encounter that night. But the first signs had begun much earlier in the day. Late in the morning, a well-dressed man had entered the confessional. His tone had been calm, even polite. He had listed his sins almost like items from a grocery list. "I did this. I said that. I forgot to pray." The words were correct. The order was correct. Nothing sounded wrong. And yet, Padre Pio felt almost nothing around him. No movement, no trembling, no shift in the invisible space that usually stirred when a heart opened. It was as if the man were describing someone else's life. Padre Pio gave him absolution, as the church commanded. He did not scold him. He did not raise his voice. But when the man left, the air remained still. No shadow left, no chain loosened, no echo of relief. It was a confession of the lips, not yet of the heart. And somewhere deep inside, Padre Pio sensed that heaven had listened, but was still waiting. Hours later, a small boy knelt inside the same confessional. His shoes did not reach the floor. His voice shook. He confessed stealing a piece of bread. He confessed lying to his mother. He confessed pushing his little sister when he grew angry. There were pauses in his sentences. He tried not to cry. He failed. As the boy stammered through his guilt, Padre Pio felt the space around them change. The darkness inside the confessional did not lift completely, but a small brightness touched it. A thin, almost invisible line of light. The boy's sins were tiny by human measure. Yet his sorrow was real. His remorse was deep. And in that deep remorse, Padre Pio sensed something pure and strong. He raised his hand and gave absolution. The boy made the sign of the cross slowly, carefully, as if it mattered. When the child left, Padre Pio closed his eyes for a brief second. In that second, he saw, not with his physical sight, but with that delicate inner awareness, a small weight falling away from the boy, like dust shaken from a coat. It was then he understood again, the power of confession does not measure the size of the sin, but the honesty of the heart. He did not yet know how far that truth would go before the day ended. Evening approached. The church grew colder. Only a few candles remained lit. The lines for confession were shorter now, made of people who had waited all day, or all year, or perhaps all their lives. Among them stood a man in a worn coat. He kept his eyes fixed on the stone floor. His hands twisted together, knuckles white. No one noticed him. He blended into the shadows. But Padre Pio felt his arrival before he ever entered the confessional. A heaviness pressed against the wooden wall, not oppressive like evil, more like someone carrying an enormous weight for too many years. Without looking, Padre Pio whispered under his breath, "Lord, give him courage." The confessional door opened. A man stepped in and knelt. Padre Pio could hear his breathing, shallow, nervous. "Bless me, Father," the man began, but his voice broke halfway. He swallowed hard and tried again. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." The words came slowly, not like a list this time, like something being pulled out from a deep, dark well. He had been away from confession for decades. He had done things he had promised himself he would never speak aloud. He had hurt people who trusted him, betrayed vows, lied to those who loved him, and lived most of his life as if God were too distant to matter. He did not tell the story cleanly. He repeated himself. He struggled to find the right words. More than once, he stopped altogether and whispered, "I'm sorry. I don't know how to say this." Padre Pio listened, silent and still. Inside, though, something had begun to stir. As the man dug deeper, admitting not only what he had done but the truth of what it had done to him, the air in the confessional thickened. It felt almost like standing at the edge of a storm. He did not sense condemnation. He sensed a decision. A line being crossed. A wall being cracked. A door slowly, painfully, opening from the inside. The man's voice grew softer. He moved from what everyone could see to what no one knew. I blamed God. I hated myself. I stopped believing I could ever come back. The last words came out almost as a sob. I don't know if there's any hope for me, but I want to try. At that exact moment, Padre Pio felt it. Something broke. Not in the man's words. In his will. The resistance that had kept him distant for years gave way. The excuses crumbled. The self-protection fell. The confession had turned from an act of obligation into an act of surrender. Padre Pio's eyes remained closed, but his inner vision opened. For a brief heartbeat, he saw the man's soul. Not as a ghost. Not as a figure. As a room. A sealed, windowless room, long darkened by shame and fear. At its center, a figure chained to the floor, head bowed, hands bound. Every sin the man had confessed lay around this figure like stones. And then, with each sincere admission, the chains loosened. With every, I am sorry, another link weakened. With every, I accept my fault, another lock cracked. When the man whispered, I want to come back, a soft light appeared at the bottom of the door. Padre Pio felt tears form behind his eyelids. This was not imagination. It was grace shown in symbols his mind could bear to hold. But what happened next was something he had never seen before. The man finished. Silence followed. He waited, breathing unevenly, as if he were standing at the edge of a verdict. Padre Pio raised his hand to give absolution. As he began the prayer, the vision deepened. In that inner room, the chained figure lifted his head for the first time. The door at the far wall glowed brighter. The chains did not vanish at once, but their weight changed. They no longer held him down. They slid from his wrists, like metal that had suddenly lost its power. A soft wind moved through the room, though there were no windows. Dust rose. Stones shifted. The figure stood. Padre Pio finished the words of absolution. The man on the other side of the grill exhaled shakily, like someone who had been underwater for too long and finally reached air. Thank you, Father, he whispered. Padre Pio did not answer at first. His voice had grown thick. He managed only, give thanks to God. He has been waiting for you much longer than you know. The man left the confessional. His footsteps echoed down the aisle. Padre Pio remained seated, but his hands gripped the arms of the chair. The vision had not yet ended. Later, when the last penitent had gone and the church was almost empty, Padre Pio stepped out into the dim corridor beside the confessional. The lantern on the wall flickered. Shadows stretched across the stone. He walked slowly, breathing in the silence. That was when he felt it again. The same presence he had sensed inside the confessional, but now standing just behind him. He turned. The corridor appeared empty, but the air was not. A faint outline, barely more than a suggestion of a form, lingered near the old stone pillar. Not frightening, not threatening, just, grateful. Padre Pio's heart pounded once, heavy. A whisper touched his soul, not his ears. You saw it, didn't you? He didn't answer aloud. He only bowed his head. Because in that quiet, shadowed passageway, Padre Pio realized heaven had decided to show him more. And the true depth of what happens during a sincere confession had only begun to unfold. The lantern's light wavered, then steadied again. The faint presence near the pillar did not move closer, yet it did not fade either. It was as if it were waiting, like someone standing at a doorway, unsure whether to enter. Padre Pio breathed slowly. He had seen souls from purgatory, sensed angels, and felt the nearness of grace many times. But this was different. This presence did not feel like a stranger. It felt like a reflection of something he had just witnessed. He whispered, barely audible, "Who are you?" There was no spoken answer. But suddenly the corridor dissolved. He was no longer standing by the lantern. He was somewhere else, inside that same interior room he had glimpsed before, but now he saw it more clearly. The floor looked worn, as if many steps had paced across it in darkness. The walls were made of memories. Scenes appeared and disappeared like images on old glass, arguments, betrayals, lonely nights, bitter thoughts, cold choices. At the center of the room stood the figure he had seen earlier. No longer chained, not yet radiant, just free. Padre Pio understood. He was seeing the man's soul at the very border between past captivity and future healing. He watched as light streamed in under the door again, stronger now. It grew until it reached the man's feet. Wherever it touched, the floor changed. What had looked like cracked, dead stone softened. It became something living, something capable of bearing weight without breaking. The man's sins were not erased as if they had never happened. They remained as faint etchings along the walls. But every time the light passed over them, the sharpness of their lines softened. The accusations carved into those images lost their voice. Padre Pio realized what he was seeing. Confession did not rewrite history. It changed the meaning of it. And that change was not symbolic. It was a real movement in the substance of a soul. A door at the far end began to open. Not wide, just enough for more light to enter. The figure in the room turned toward it, hesitant. Old habits tugged at his ankles. Shame tried to pull him back, but he had confessed sincerely. He had chosen truth over pride, and that choice was now visible in the very way the room responded. As he stepped toward the opening, each movement sent faint threads of darkness sliding off his shoulders. They fell to the ground and dissolved, like smoke vanishing in wind. Padre Pio watched silently, his heart aching with a strange mix of sorrow and awe. Sorrow, for all the years the man had lived chained to this hidden place. Awe, for how quickly, in the light of mercy, those chains had lost their power. Then the vision widened. The walls of the room began to fade. Other rooms appeared beyond it, like countless chambers in a vast, invisible city. Some were dark, some were dim, some already glowed with steady light. In each one, a soul stood or knelt or sat, surrounded by the shape of its own story. Some rooms were still locked from the inside. No one had yet dared to knock, to say, "I have sinned," with honesty. Other rooms had doors cracked open. A thin ray of light had already entered, perhaps from one restless, stumbling confession that had not yet gone deeper. But in a few rooms, very few, the scene resembled what he had just witnessed. Chains falling, doors opening, light advancing with authority. Those were the souls that had confessed sincerely, not perfectly, not eloquently, simply, truly. Padre Pio understood that heaven had allowed him to see not just one confession, but the hidden reality beneath every sincere confession on earth. It was not a ritual. It was a battle, a surgery, a liberation. And the surgeon's hands were mercy. The rooms slowly faded, until only one remained, the original one, now almost completely filled with light. The man's soul stood near the open door. He did not rush through it. Healing would take time. But he was no longer imprisoned. From somewhere beyond the threshold, a gentle presence approached. Not overwhelming, not blinding, just unmistakably loving. Padre Pio could not see the face. He did not need to. He knew who it was. A hand extended from the light. The soul hesitated, then reached out. When their hands met, the entire room brightened, as if every corner that had once been hidden now belonged to someone who would never use it to condemn, only to redeem. Padre Pio felt a tear slide down his cheek in the corridor, even though his body was standing still. The vision ended. He was back beside the lantern, hands still resting against the cold stone pillar. The faint presence near him now felt peaceful, like someone who had been waiting simply to say goodbye. He understood. This was not a soul from purgatory appearing to ask for help. This was a reflection of what happened in that man when he had finally spoken his sins with truth. A trace of the transformation. A spiritual echo. A quiet gratitude. Padre Pio whispered, "Thank you for letting me see." The presence faded, gentle as breath on glass. The corridor seemed normal again, but nothing, for him, was normal. In the days that followed, he continued to hear confessions as always. He did not tell people about the rooms or the chains or the doors of light. He simply listened, more carefully than ever. When someone repeated a list of sins without remorse, he felt the stillness of a locked door. He prayed that someday they would grow tired of the darkness they chose. When someone spoke with trembling honesty, he felt the floor shake beneath invisible chains. He knew that heaven was closer than they realized. Sometimes, as he raised his hand to give absolution, he would pause for a heartbeat and whisper silently, "Lord, open the door. Turn their remorse into freedom." He carried the memory of that night like a quiet fire inside him, not as a spectacle, as a responsibility. Years later, a friar asked him softly, "Father, why do you stay so many hours in the confessional? You look so tired." Padre Pio smiled faintly, his eyes shadowed with both fatigue and tenderness. "Because," he answered, "when a person confesses sincerely, something happens that they cannot see. Chains fall, doors open, light touches places that have been dark for a lifetime." The friar listened, struck silent. Padre Pio lowered his voice even more. "And sometimes," he added, "God allows me to see a little of it. After that, how could I leave?" He said no more. That night, alone in his cell, his hands moved slowly over the rosary. His lips murmured prayers for all those who were still afraid to step into the light. He thought of the man in the worn coat, of the chained figure who had stood up, of the door that had opened just enough for mercy to enter. He closed his eyes and breathed a final, almost inaudible request. Lord, when they dare to say, "Forgive me," show them what you showed me. Let them feel that they are no longer alone inside their own story. Then he rested his hands, the beads still between his fingers. Outside, the church was quiet. Inside the unseen rooms of countless souls, doors waited, ready to open at the next sincere whisper. And in that deep, invisible silence, one truth remained. A sincere confession does not simply change what God thinks of a soul. It changes what the soul finally dares to believe about God.